housing practices, and so much more. Again, that's Tuesday nights at 9:30 right here on WLAE.
Watch WLAE Digital Broadcast Channel 32.3 for Catholic TV, offering programming relevant to Catholic viewers, including live religious services, Vatican events, talk shows, devotional programs, educational entertainment, and children's programs. You're watching WLAE, New Orleans Public Television.
Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is underwritten by...
At Villeries Florist, we deliver the magic of flowers 7 days a week to the North Shore and South Shore in the New Orleans area. Whether it's for birthday parties, baby celebrations, Villeries provides colorful floral displays for all. With a store full of fresh-cut flowers, exotic tropical flowers, orchids, roses, and even fruit baskets, our goal is to make your vision a reality. Villeries Florist, proudly serving Louisiana since 1969.
Dave Miette Insurance Agency. Auto, home, flood, business, 504-556-0809. Dave Miette, INSagency.com.
C&C Drugs is a family-owned pharmacy that's been serving Southeast Louisiana for over 50 years. Whether you need help taking care of an elderly family member, a growing child, or even a pet, C&C provides patient-centered care for your entire family. C&C Drugs, large enough to serve you, small enough to know you. Locations in Mandeville and Araby.
Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Over the next hour, we'll cover all the home teams for you. We'll talk about the Saints, LSU, Tulane football. We'll get into the Pelicans, talk about their summer league. Look forward to, again, the season. Right around the corner, training camp for the Pelicans, and the Saints are in training camp now. Of course, again, fall's coming, so you know Tulane and LSU will be in camp very soon as well. To break it down for us, one of the best we have in the state. Les East of CrestCitySports.com, Saturday Down South, and of course, a great author as well. Les, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thanks, Eric. Good to be back.
Good to have you. Before we get started, tell the folks about the book, about CrestCitySports.com, and of course, Saturday Down South.
Thanks. The book is called Donkeys, Elephants, and Giraffes. It's a political novel dealing with the media as well as some sports insights, hopefully.
Yeah.
And it's available at all the major platforms, BarnesandNoble.com, Amazon.com, etc. CrescentCitySports.com. Of course, I'm writing for them on most of the topics you just talked about. Posted something about the Saints based on the news conferences on Tuesday, and we'll be having Saints and Pelicans and LSU and Tulane, throughout the coming months. Saturday Down South, we have LSU and SEC coverage kicking in. I periodically dabble in the Mississippi schools in addition to the Tigers, so that's ramping up as well. So it's about to get really busy.
Yes, it is. It's about to get very busy. Let's start, and as the taping of this show, we're taping this on a Wednesday morning. I wanted to talk a little bit about out of the box what happened yesterday in camp as Saints started their camp in California. Alvin Kamara reporting to camp now. As of the taping this show, we don't know if, again, he will participate in the first practice. Everyone is anticipating he will participate in the first practice. But again, Alvin Kamara reporting to camp after, again, walking out of their final mini-camp practice in a contract dispute.
Yeah, and also, as we're taping, Alvin is scheduled to be one of the players available for interviews after practice.
That ought to be
so
nice.
If that happens, that means he's going to practice,
yes.
and then maybe he can shed some light on his situation, but I never thought this was an emergency situation, even when he skipped the last minicamp practice. Of course, it's something you got to keep an eye on. It can always balloon into something bigger. But I think his motivation, I'm sure he and his agent discussed this at minicamp. I think the idea was they were unhappy with the progress of negotiations on a new contract. So what better way to get it out in the public than to skip a mini camp practice? It becomes the biggest topic of the day, becomes public. Everybody panics. Oh my God, Alvin skipped practice. He's going to hold out. The sky is falling. And maybe that would light a fire under the Saints to kind of move the negotiations a little closer to where Alvin and his agent would like them to be. Whether or not that was successful, I don't know. But I think that's basically what happened last month. And it will be something to monitor going forward. You'd like to have a new deal done before we get too far into training camp. I don't know if that's going to happen, but you know, Alvin's one of the biggest pros on the team. Everybody raved about him being in shape like he always is, and he'll be a total pro about this.
Agreed.
As long as he's doing his football business, and we'll see if the contract situation becomes a distraction, but at this point, I don't think it's a major problem.
I mean, the gist of this is trying to get guaranteed money for 2025. The narrative has been he's a 29-year-old running back. Once you get to 30, you see again them possibly falling off a cliff. This is an offense seems to be tailor-made for his skill set. We saw Christian McCaffrey again rejuvenate his career in San Francisco after a lot of folks thought he was done as well. The Saints obviously have cap issues still. How do you think this is going to be resolved? Do you think that ultimately, again, they will come and maybe meet in the middle here, have some guaranteed money for Kamara going forward, or they'll let this thing play out to next year?
I think as long as both sides are willing to give a bit, a reasonable amount in their opinion, I think they can get a deal done. It's not guaranteed by any means, no pun intended. But, you know, I don't know. I'm sure the Saints are using that 29-year-old, you know, generic running backs start to fall off after 30 years. After they hit 30, and I think we saw hints last year that Alvin may not be 100% the back he once was. But I think he's still a very good player, and there's reason to think.
Allen said he saw some flashes of him in minicamp that, you know, maybe again he's not on the downward spiral. My words, not his.
Yeah, I think he is. If he's not the runner we're used to seeing, he's very, very close. And so that makes him one of the more dynamic players at his position in the NFL, and I think it's reasonable to think that will continue for another year or two or three. So I don't know if you can, you know, use these actuary tables and apply them to somebody like Alvin Kamara, who's a special player. But the Saints will try and do that to get the best contract for them, and Alvin and his agent will do the same. So we'll see. I think both sides are pretty reasonable. Both sides want to get it done. So I think there's a good chance it will get done sooner rather than later. But if it goes into the season without getting done, again, I don't think that's really going to affect what happens on the football field.
I spoke about it on the radio show yesterday, and when you look at Alvin Kamara, his career, again, he goes to the University of Alabama, doesn't play, he transfers to Tennessee, so not a lot of wear and tear on him in his collegiate years. And then you look at the type of runner he is. He's a guy, that deflects hits. He doesn't take a lot of big hits. You know, recently, again, we've seen him go out of bounds more, okay, maybe to preserve his body. I believe this system, much like with McCaffrey, is tailor-made for Kamara, and he will excel in this system if the offensive line can hold up this year. With that said, if the Saints don't get a deal done, they may be looking at squarely having to maybe pay him more next season to be able to try to hold on to him, because look, let's face it, Miller has shown nothing since he has come into the league, often injured. Williams, again, had a nice career in Green Bay and Detroit, but that is not translated to New Orleans. They got a kid, Mims, again, that they brought in that's in camp. Maybe he's a camp body, maybe he's not. So when you look at the running back position, it's Alvin Kamara.
Oh, no question about it. Now, I will say Kendre Miller was hurt a lot last year, got hurt last year in college, looked very good against the Falcons in the last game of the regular season. So it's possible he could still be a factor in that game.
If he stays healthy.
If he stays healthy. Now, there's certainly nothing guaranteed about that. But, yeah, beyond this season, anything's possible with Alvin because he's not going to play in 2025 under the terms of this contract because it's a poison pill.
Right,
so
exactly.
That's not going to happen. So you have to get a new deal done, or they have to move on, which is not out of the question because the conventional wisdom in the NFL has changed a lot over the years as far as how easy it is to replace your best running back. Jamal Williams is not going to be a factor in that conversation this year or next year. So if they move on from Alvin after this year, they're probably going to have to find their number one running back somewhere else, which is not something you really want to do, but it is something that it seems to be more easily addressed in the minds of NFL teams than it once was. So, 2025 is a total question mark at this point with Alvin, but I think 2024, he's going to be ready to go, and regardless of the contract situation, I think he is going to be the primary weapon in this offense. And you brought up Christian McCaffrey, and those two have been compared a lot through their careers because they're similar type players. I don't know Christian McCaffrey's age, but I do believe they were in the same draft class. So he thrived in that offense last season at essentially the same age as Alvin. So, there's no reason to think Alvin won't be able to thrive nearly as well, if not as well, this year and perhaps beyond.
Another little bit of good news yesterday was Chase Young, who was on the PUP list. Loomis and Allen saying that he is going to participate in practice day in some form or fashion. So maybe he has moved along maybe a little quicker than most thought he would be, and maybe he'll be ready for the regular season, depending on what happens in this training camp. But good news that he will participate today.
Yeah, the hope all along was that he would be on the field at the start of training camp, and it looks like they've hit that benchmark. Now, practicing fully, being ready to play in a real game, not sure where that is yet, but there's a lot of time before the opener against Carolina. So it's all encouraging up to this point. We'll learn more, I think, later today and over the coming days. And when they put the pads on next week, I mean, you can go out there and run around in shorts and a T-shirt, and that doesn't mean a whole lot. So, we'll see in the coming days. But, yeah, that's one of the major things to keep an eye on in training camp is how Chase Young gets back to 100% after the neck surgery. And then, of course, once the season starts, how effective he is going to be one of the major questions about this team.
I would agree. When I look at the defensive line, two of the X factors on that defensive line are again, Chase Young, his ability to maybe recapture what he had in his rookie year at Washington, what we saw in glimpses last year in the Super Bowl with San Francisco, and be a guy that, again, has to be double-teamed. Again, that's going to help Granderson. That's going to help, obviously, Cam Jordan as well, because you're not going to be counting on him as much. And then the other part of it, again, is who's going to man the interior of that defense in terms of run stopping. Again, when you look at that is one of the issues going into this season, the ability to stop the run, which kind of sets up everything else for this defense.
Yeah, I agree. And Chase Young is maybe the most important piece to that puzzle for all the reasons you mentioned. I think on the interior, I think Brian Brissy had a very good rookie year, and I think he's ready to take on a bigger role. And we'll see exactly how that plays out. Carl Granderson has gotten better every year. He's a good starting defensive end in the NFL. We'll see if he's still a starter based on what Chase Young does, but he's going to be a quasi-starter at the very least. And then, of course, anything you get out of Peyton Turner at this point is Lanyard.
Agreed. And Foskey as well, right?
And Isaiah Foskey, who had a disappointing rookie year, but he's only 1 year into his career. Granderson, Peyton Turner is much deeper into his career. So
that final year on his contract, he'll be a free agent next year.
Yeah, so he certainly has the incentive to have an impact this year. And if he can stay healthy, he might be able to do that.
Well, kind of a la Davenport, right? I mean, again, when you start looking at that situation, kind of, you know, again, they mirror each other, which is one of the reasons why the Saints are in the situation they are right now. You know, they have whiffed on big men, and again, put a lot of draft stock in big men, and they've whiffed on them, and because of that, again, you see where they are right now. Obviously, again, the Saints' success this year, in my opinion, it comes down to what they do in the trenches. We talked a little bit about the defensive line, offensive line. In mini camp, they had all their draftees again as their starting linemen. Salaveri at left guard. You had Fuaga at left tackle. They moved Penning to right tackle, and of course you had Ruiz and McCoy at center. They have Patrick, Lemieux, Herring, and Udo that are again that have been veterans that are now supposedly backing up. All those guys on one-year deals. Even Mickey Loomis and Dennis Allen talked again yesterday about the situation with the offensive line. They're hoping that their draftees are good enough to be able to again form a solid offensive line for them. I'm of the opinion you got to show me, because Salaveri couldn't get on the field last year with again a horrible offensive line.
Right. You're
trying to tell me now in 1 year Penning is going to be able to move from the left tackle to the right back tackle position and to be able to play that and then of course Fuaga moving from the left side from the right side where he played in college to the left side in the pros. There's just so many moving parts here with their young players. I'll be interested to see again how these veterans look once the pads come on. What are your thoughts about the offensive line?
Well, it is, I think, by far the biggest storyline in training camp. Now, normally you would say when you get rid of your longest tenured assistant coach, and Pete Carmichael, who's been there for 18 years and been a coordinator for the biggest, one of the most successful offensive run in franchise history, and you replace him with someone who's never been a coordinator before, but has an excellent pedigree, you would say that's going to be the biggest storyline. Derek Carr's third system in 3 years.
Right.
But we're not going to know anything about that until they start playing real games. You're not going to tell anything in practice or preseason games about that. So that's down the road. The single biggest story in training camp, which is when you figure out your starters and your depth chart, is the offensive line. Quarterback's the most important position on the team, obviously. Offensive line is the most important group on the team, and the Saints are unsure about 60% of their starters. Okay, they know Eric McCoy is solid at center and the leader of the group and a leader on the team.
And one of the best in the NFL at his position.
Yeah, very good, very important, one of the most important players on the team. Cesar Ruiz, I think, has gradually gotten better, has become serviceable at right guard, might be a good starting right guard if he continues to progress. But after that, as you mentioned, you have a rookie at left tackle who played right tackle in college. You have a second-year guy who played, I believe, 16 offensive snaps as a rookie.
Basically a rookie?
Is your favorite to be your starting left guard. And then a third-year tackle who did nothing his first 2 years, partly because of injury, partly because he wasn't ready. And you've moved him from left tackle to right tackle, which might help, but I doubt that that's a cure-all for what we've seen the first 2 years. So I do think it's helpful to have the veterans you mentioned as a safety net, but I think if you go into the season with one of those veterans starting, it better be because they knocked your socks off in training camp and not because somebody spit the bit.
Right.
So those three young offensive linemen, that's the biggest question mark facing this team. It's the biggest thing to focus on in training camp and the preseason. If all three of those guys, and they're all talented guys they believe in, if they all are up to the challenges they have, everything might be fine. But that's asking an awful lot of three unproven players. So I think that's the biggest thing to watch in training camp. And I want to get back to the defensive line quickly because you brought up a good point. And I think that's the second biggest storyline.
So do I.
In training camp is how the defensive line comes together. But you talk about they have to stop the run better. No question about that. That's one of the most important things. And you look at the trickle-down effect, and you and I have followed this franchise from the beginning. This is the best and deepest collection of cornerbacks the Saints have ever had. By far in the history of the franchise. That's great. And it gives them a lot to work with that a lot of teams don't have.
Yes.
But if they don't stop the run, they're going to have a hard time rushing the passer, and even this group of cornerbacks is going to struggle. If they stop the run and put teams in obvious passing situations, and those defensive linemen we talked about can rush the passer without having to blitz an inordinate amount, then stopping the run, getting a pass rush from the front four with those cornerbacks, as well as a solid linebacking core, serviceable safeties, you go from being a good to very good defense to being an elite defense.
Agreed.
So I think that whole trickle-down effect on the starting with the defensive line, stopping the run, generating a pass rush, and maximizing the ability of those cornerbacks is huge.
Right. And maybe that changes the, lack of a better word, the forecast for this season with a lot of national and local pundits, again, looking at this as a team that maybe is not as talented as maybe Atlanta and Tampa Bay in a very bad division.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I think if you look at this team, if you're, a bookie in Vegas or a national reporter or whatever, and you look at this team from the outside, you're going to say, well, okay, they improved by 2 wins last year. They had a winning record, almost went to the playoffs. They have a lot of young talent, but they have a new offensive coordinator, never done the job before, mostly a new offensive staff. The questions on the offensive line, the questions on the defensive line, a quarterback entering his 3rd system in 3 years. All of those things, you're going to look at it and say, all of those questions could be answered positively. Sure. Any of them could be. But I'm expecting that some of those will not be answered positively because of the law of averages, that you're expecting a lot of unproven things to turn out really good. Right. And so I can see why the expectations would be fairly low for this team. I think I saw one over-under line that was set at like 7.5.
7.5, right.
Yeah. That seems a little low to me, or let's put it this way, if you told me I had to make that bet, I think I would take the over, but I understand why the line's at 7.5 for all the question marks that I just broached.
Even again, when we talk about the offensive line, okay, you've got a lot of guys you've drafted, you put draft stock in those guys are unproven. Now you're telling me they're going to possibly be your starters. And then the guys behind them, although veterans, but in today's landscape of the NFL, if you're a very good offensive lineman, you don't get away from the team that has your rights. And on top of that, if you are on the free agent market, you're signing for more than 1-year deals. So I mean, again, I don't want to downplay what those guys mean to this team, because they need an influx of veterans on that offensive line, because you're so young with the players you're trying to be able to put out there right now. But again, you're looking at guys that, could they have stayed with the team, their original team? Maybe. But again, they came here for a 1-year deal, and prove it to me deal. So again, where are you there? So, I mean, again, I've been saying on the program for a long time, for lack of a better term, it's a roll of the dice when you start talking about this offensive line. And you really better hope that, again, the draft capital that you put into these players and their new offensive line coach, Coach Benton, can get the absolute max amount of these guys, both, again, those that have been drafted and those guys that are coming in as veterans.
You're absolutely right. And those veterans were brought in for a few reasons. One was to give them quality depth, because you're generally going to have some attrition on the offensive line over the course of a 17-game season. To give them veterans who can show the younger guys how to be a professional and to supplement the coaching they're getting from the offensive line coaches. And then to be able to step in if injury or ineffectiveness forces them into the lineup. But if this offensive line is going to be what Mickey Loomis alluded to yesterday, he said that, if they had a good run there for years where they were confident going into the season they had one of the better offensive lines in the NFL, they don't have that confidence now. They believe that can still be the case, but a lot of it is unproven. So if they're going to have the kind of offensive line with the kind of continuity you really need to have to be a good offensive line, those 3 young guys are the ones who have to do it. Those veterans are not going to bring about that type of line unless something unexpected happens with them. But they would not be here if they had shown the ability to do what they would have to do as starters with the Saints.
And here's another piece of this. These offensive linemen were drafted when the Saints were going after big offensive linemen, physical offensive linemen. In this system, you need athletic offensive linemen. And the question is, again, how does a Penning fit there? Yeah, Williams works in San Francisco, but he's one of the best tackles in football. So again, the draftees that you've drafted, again, can they translate to this new scheme that's being put in and the athleticism that it takes to be an offensive lineman in this system?
Yeah, I think Penning's the big question mark there, because Fuaga is a guy.
There's no doubt. He's tailor-made for it.
Yeah, he's tailor-made for it. They brought him in after the coaching change.
Yeah, exactly.
So he's definitely what they were looking for. Saldiveri, I think, is probably athletic enough, especially playing on the interior.
Right?
In the interior, yeah. So I don't think that's a big concern with him. But with Penning, this is a really big, strong guy, and maybe not as nimble as the prototype for the offense they want to run. And maybe that makes the right side a little bit better for him.
Yeah.
But like as Dennis Allen said on draft night, really the distinction between left tackle and right tackle is not as pronounced as it once was.
Right.
So,
because every team seems to have two good defensive ends that can rush the pass.
Right, and they move them around.
Exactly.
So you can't like say, well, we'll move. This guy's not good enough to be a left tackle, but we make him a right tackle. And he'll
They
be
used to be able to hide that back in the day, but not anymore.
Yeah. So you know, I don't know if that change winds up making a big difference or not. Ultimately, Trevor Penning has to prove he's capable of being a starting tackle in the NFL. And if that's on the right side, great. But you know, I don't think the position switch in itself solves that issue. So we'll see. But you're right. I think the transition for him, not from left to right as much as from the old system to the new system, is going to be a significant challenge for him. But he's a talented guy, and I hope he can make it, because I think he's a good kid who's trying hard.
He's one of the keys. He's one of the keys to, again, the success of this team, especially with a quarterback in Derek Carr, who we saw again last season, who we've seen through his career, again, that needs to have blocking to be successful. Okay, he gets the happy feet. We saw again last year, it wasn't until, again, that offensive line kind of had some cohesion that he started to get a comfort level, and he started playing much better toward the end of the season.
Yeah, and you look at that Atlanta game at the end, you know, which is what you're hoping that, that's the offense and that's the team that we're going to carry into the next season. And I don't know if that's realistic or not, but they ran the ball. You know, and Kendre Miller had that big game.
He did.
They ran the ball. So just like the defense has to stop the run better in order for them to have the pass rush and pass defense that can be special, on offense, they have to run the ball behind that uncertain offensive line in order to give them a chance to pass block, so that Derek Carr has a chance to be successful. So it's a mirror image of the questions on the defensive line. They have to have a good group of five that fits together and matches a new system. That's a lot going on in this training camp.
No doubt, which is one of the reasons why I'm glad they moved to California for the training camp. I know, again, as they talked about, again, the construction that's going on. This team needed to be sequestered. And they talked a little about it yesterday. I actually talked about it on the radio show before they mentioned that yesterday. The ability to get away. There's no distractions with, again, your business interests, your family, etc. I mean, when they're in New Orleans, their families are in New Orleans, okay? Especially the veterans. They're having to deal with their families. Again, they're now moved to California. You're in a situation now where this is Dennis Allen's team. I read an article recently that said there's only 3 coaches left, again, from the Payton regime, and there's only 18 players left from the Payton regime. So this is Dennis Allen's team, and again, they have to reestablish a culture, a winning culture, and one way to do that is, again, to get away where, again, it's just the team concentrating on football, and hopefully this may be, again, the first step in getting that done.
Yeah, I think the timing of this, if there's a good time to get away for training camp, I think this is it. Just like I think in 2006, Sean Payton was wise to go to Millsaps because he was starting a new program,
Right.
and he wanted to get away and just be focused on football in Spartan conditions. And so I think that's important. And Alan talked about it yesterday about the culture, which is primarily about the players. But here's where I think being out in California can helpful in that regard. You know, being the culture, yeah, you want good guys who are good citizens and guys who like each other. But it also comes down to when they're released at the end of the day, do they go straight home, or do they go look at more film?
Right.
Or do they go home and look at film on their laptops or their phone, because they don't have to stay in the facility anymore? And do they grab teammates and say, hey, let's take another hour or two and look at this stuff and talk about how we're going to handle this stuff? And being in California with nowhere to go, really, it's more likely that they're going to say, yeah, well, let's spend some more time studying film, talking through this, maybe even going on the field individually and doing that. It's a lot easier to do that than when you say, I got to go pick up my kids after school, if that's the case, or get home to my family, or whatever the responsibilities are. So I think it's that they've talked about the culture slipping a little bit in the last couple of years. Of course, it always looks that way when you're not going to the playoffs. But nonetheless, that was an emphasis. They identified that as a need to get better culture-wise. And I think being in California helps in trying to improve the culture.
You know, Les, they have to establish the culture. Peyton's gone. He's in Denver. Okay, those coaches are gone now. Most of those players are gone now. This has to be Dennis Allen's culture. You know, they have that has to be established. And I don't know if that was really established in the first 2 years here. You know, again, the first year we're still trying to be, again, Sean Payton's team. The second year, again, maybe we're part Sean Payton's team, maybe part Dennis Allen's team. This has got to be Dennis Allen's team this year. Okay, and it's a defining season for him as well as a head coach.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think, you know, probably the main reason Dennis Allen got the job was what we kept hearing, continuity. And that made sense. But part of continuity is maybe being a little too tethered to the past and not making that break as cleanly as you could make it. And so I think that was not helpful the first year in the way that they envisioned it being. Last year, I think they improved. They won 2 more games. I think he felt more in control. I think with a new quarterback, and you know, there were a lot of changes made. I think they started to move farther away. And you're right. This is the year that all of that has to be in the rearview mirror. It doesn't help that Sean Payton's coming to the Superdome in October, but you know, that's
coming off a tough stretch to start the season too.
But you know, that's the cards you're dealt. But you're right, it's Dennis Allen's team. It's up to him to set the tone, to establish the culture, if you want to use that term. But he also has Cam Jordan and Demario Davis and Tyrann Mathieu and Eric McCoy and Derek Carr and Alvin Kamara. So there are a lot of players left over, not a lot, but key players left over from the previous regime who are still the leaders in the locker room and still a big part of the leadership of this program. And it's on them to rally behind Dennis Allen and lead the way for the younger players and the newcomers.
Yep, no doubt. Les Cease, CrestCitySports.com. Saturday Down South is our guest. I'm your host, Eric Asher. You're watching Inside New Orleans Sports. We'll come back, we'll talk some Pels, then we'll jump back into football, talking about LSU and Tulane as they get ready to start their camp as well. Stay tuned to hear from our underwriters. We'll be right back.
Located at 3701 Iberville Street in Mid-City is Katie's Restaurant and Bar. Open 7 days a week, Katie's offers daily specials for lunch, dinner, and Sunday brunch. Serving New Orleans cuisine such as fried shrimp platters, grilled redfish, and a fully stocked bar. And don't forget about our expanded event seating and local entertainment. Featured on the Best of Food Network's diners, drive-ins, and dives, Katie's Restaurant and Bar.
Burkhart's Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration has been family-owned and operated since 1989. Burkhart has energy-efficient solutions and offers brands such as Mitsubishi ductless AC units and Amana, the only manufacturer with a lifetime unit replacement warranty. Burkhart's offers maintenance bundle packages that include servicing your AC, generator, and tankless water heater. For more information on the services Burkhart's provides, visit acpromise.com. Burkhart's Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration, providing comfort for life.
Welcome back to Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Les East is our guest today. We talk a little Pelicans now. First of all, let's talk a little bit about the big issue right now, which is, again, Brandon Ingram. Will he be traded? Will he not be traded? And then, again, an offshoot to that is, again, the center position, what they're going to do there. I want to start with the center position, though. They signed Daniel Tice, again, a long-time NBA backup. They have Makovich, again, the kid that was in Birmingham, who, again, they signed to, again, a 3-year deal. They brought him up from Birmingham. Now he'll be on the parent club. And they go out and draft Misi from Baylor, who is, again, very raw center. Tice really held his own the other day against the Americans. In 16 minutes, he had 13 points, 7 rebounds, 4 assists, a steal, no blocks. Again, 1 for 3 from the three-point line, 5 for 9 from the field, and again, really held his own against the Americans. But I talked about this on the radio show the other day. That didn't surprise me. I know who Daniel Tice is. Okay, he is a legitimate NBA backup center. Again, he is also more of a power forward than a center, but again, he can play either of those positions. He's physical. He can rebound for you. He can step out and hit the three-point shot, but he's not a starting center. He's a backup center in the NBA. You look at Makovich. Again, he showed a lot of promise down in the G League. He showed some real promise in Las Vegas, so much so they didn't play him in the last few games. And of course, it looks like Misi's going to be a project who probably will end up in Birmingham. He's got a lot of athletic skill, but he just doesn't have the basketball skill set that you need to be able to play in the NBA. What do you think they're going to do at the center position? Do you think they'll go into this season with Tice as the starter? Especially if they cannot trade Brandon Ingram, or they will try again all the way up until maybe the trading deadline, but hopefully again before the season starts, to try to fill that void at the center position.
Well, I think they're definitely going to try and add to the center position.
Right.
I do think they feel like if worse comes to worse and they go into the season with those 3 guys, that you put the 3 together, and I think they're hopeful that Misi's going to be able to contribute something. Right. I know going into the draft when we all expected them to pick a center,
yes,
the name I heard, that if somebody could come in and do what Derek Lively did with the Mavericks last year, that would be great. I think that's maybe that's a little more than you can expect from Misi
Lively
as
has
a
been
rookie.
playing basketball most of his life. This guy is not.
So I think that's a little too much to expect, and I'm not saying they expected that when they picked him. I think that's what they were hoping to get. But nonetheless, I think they are hopeful that he will be able to give them some minutes on a fairly regular basis. And then Tice, I think, is, like you said, a solid backup, and then Makovich as maybe a stretch 5.
Yes.
You can kind of cobble it together if you have to.
If you have to.
Because the other 4 are outstanding.
Yes.
And the depth is good. So that's the big question mark. But I think they will definitely be looking at ways to upgrade that position. Now, of course, if they still move Ingram, which seems far less likely than it did maybe 6 weeks ago, you would expect that they would get a quality center in return. With the acquisition of DeJounte Murray and financial considerations, maybe C.J. McCollum becomes expendable. He could certainly bring you an upgrade at the center position if you were to make that trade. Or there could be a less ambitious trade that happens where they bring in another piece to the puzzle and maybe allow Misi to spend more time in Birmingham if they have another veteran. So there's still options out there. I think they're looking at all of them. But I do think they've gotten to the point where they would be at peace with the trio they have if it comes to that.
Les, when I was thinking about this the other day, because I'm watching this, and again, I've really been all over the center position, almost ad nauseum on the radio show, because I saw what happened with Oklahoma City last year. And again, not really having a true center, and again, how that hurt them in the playoffs. Now, maybe this is the thought process with Griffin and Green is, look, we had Valanciunas on the team last year, and we utilized him to start, and then after that, we went small. And maybe that's their thought process. We'll start with Tice, and we'll play him some minutes when we need to play him against the bigs, but more than likely we're going to try to go small. The issue with that is they lack rebounding and they lack rim protection if they don't have a center.
Yeah, and that's where I think ultimately Misi becomes an answer. The question is, how much of an answer can he provide as a rookie? And I suppose somewhere in the equation, based on the matchup, you might be able to play Zion Williamson at the 5 in the small lineup, but that's not something that's sustainable.
But he's not a rebounder and he's not a shot blocker. He's an off-the-ball shot blocker.
Right. He can give you minutes there, but he doesn't solve the core issue. So, yeah, that is a big question mark. And, you know, I don't know that you can look at this and say this is part of the grand plan. I think they felt like they had to let Valanciunas go for all of the good things that he brought, and there were many. The point was the way they want to play, he just didn't fit quite right, and it was time to go all in on a group that can switch all the positions, be more athletic.
Well, Tyson's in a more athletic version of Valanciunas, but not as big and maybe not as physical.
Right, but he's a little bit closer to what they want that position to be. And so I think this has been a step-by-step process. The draft came around, they got the guy I think they wanted, doesn't fix the problem short term, helps a little bit, maybe fixes it in a year or two.
Agreed.
Then the DeJounte Murray trade comes along, and you can't pass that up.
And what did you gave up for him? Again, we're having to do that without
give up a starter to get him. You could not pass up that trade. That didn't solve the problem, but you could not possibly pass up that opportunity.
Agreed.
The Ingram talks to this point have not yielded what they had hoped. Maybe that will change, maybe it won't. So they went out and they gave Matkovic some time in Vegas. He showed some flashes that maybe are encouraging. And then they went out and got Tice, which helped. So I think, you know, I don't know this is exactly what they envisioned. I think it's been one step at a time along the way. Letting Valanciunas go, shopping Ingram, making the Murray trade, drafting Misi, not necessarily in that order, but each step of the way they've tried to evolve the roster to where they want to be. I don't think they're there yet. I think I don't think they just went into the season and said, "This is what we're gonna do." I think they've reacted each step along the way and done the best they could. I think at each step along the way, but it remains a work in progress.
I do think they're probably surprised there's not a market for Brandon Ingram. Because I think, again, and this is my opinion, that maybe Griff was looking at, okay, I'm going to get the Murray situation. I don't have to give up Ingram, but I can get that center and maybe another piece, defensive piece that can help me by moving a Brandon Ingram. That has not come to fruition yet. $36 million left on his deal, final year of the contract. He wants $52 million a max deal. There's not an NBA team out there that's willing to do that at this point. It looks like they're going to try to play it out. From Griff said on Sirius satellite radio the other day that they're going to run it what they have. They're going to play it out. We'll see again. Do you think they do that all the way to the trading deadline? Do you think they can let Brandon Ingram, with the last piece of the Anthony Davis deal, walk for nothing?
Well, that's not the ideal situation, but I do think that scenario is more likely than I would have thought. Again, about 6 weeks ago or so. They have a fund. Well, there are a few things here. First of all, the money situation. The Pelicans don't want to pay him $52 million, and nobody else does. And nobody else is going to give you the deal you want to get him unless you sign him to a deal that he's happy with before you trade him, so that they don't lose him after next year. So they're going to be at a crossroads here pretty soon. Do you lower your expectations and saying, we don't want to have him for one more year and then let him walk for nothing, or try and sell him at the trading deadline? Let's lower our expectations. If we can get a serviceable starting center and some other asset or assets, that's not quite what we had hoped for, but fills out the roster and takes that out of the equation, that complication with Ingram. Then do you do that? Do you lower what you're willing to get in return? Or do you say, let's go ahead and ride with what we have. We have a full 1 through 4, and depth-wise, we're about as good as a lot of teams in the NBA, better than a lot of teams in the NBA. Do we go ahead and ride that out and let Brandon see what he can be a part of going forward? And maybe that gives us a breakthrough in the contract talks, and maybe there's other maneuvering that we can do, and eventually get a deal done down the road that's more favorable. Open his eyes to what his future here can be without getting as much money as he wants. There's some rolling of the dice that's going to go on.
It's interesting you say that, because again, one of the things I talk about on the radio show is, again, if Brandon Ingram, first of all, we hear Brandon Ingram loves New Orleans and he wants to be here, okay? Loves his team, etc. Well, that said, again, look, it's all about money at the end of the day, okay? For Brandon, it might be in his best interest to sign a 2-year extension, okay? And I've talked about this on the radio show. Have that deal, maybe it's 40, maybe it's 42 million instead of 52 million, right? He's making 36 this year. So maybe you get that, you're playing 1 more year on for 42 million, but then that second year, that deal is a player option. He can get out again and be a free agent once again. He needs to rehabilitate his reputation here, okay, based on what happened in the playoffs last year and with Team USA before the season started. For him, it might be in his best interest to do that, and then for the Pelicans, it's easier for them to trade him ultimately if he wants to be traded to another team if he has 2 years left on the deal, this year and next year.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And, and I think why staying here for another year or two or indefinitely also makes sense for him. He's a good player.
Yes.
He's not an alpha.
Right.
Okay. Zion Williamson's an alpha. DeJounte Murray is an alpha. So with the roster they now have, he doesn't have to be the guy he oftentimes had to be when Zion Williamson was hurt. When he had to try and carry the team while he was hurt during the playoffs when Zion Williamson was out. He doesn't have to do that as long as Williamson and Murray and C.J. McCollum, assuming he's here, he doesn't have the expectations placed on him that he's had in the past. And I think it's a lot easier for him to just be who he is and be a very important part of what could be a really good team. I think he should look around, and I'm sure he's doing this, at the opportunity presented to him individually by what he has been surrounded with, and that should be very attractive to him.
A lot of time to talk about the Pels. Again, they go into camp at the beginning of October, and of course, by the middle of October is preseason, and then the season starts toward the end of October. All right, LSU football. The season outlook. I think they were picked 5th by the media in the SEC at the SEC media days. There are some that believe they're a top 12 team, that they will be in the playoff. There are some that believe that, again, with the addition of Oklahoma and Texas, the SEC will get that much tougher. Ole Miss is really good this year. Then again, maybe LSU will be on the outside looking in. You cover the Tigers. What do you think the outlook is for this team?
I think they're capable of being one of those 12 teams. I'm not confident they're going to be one of those 12 teams. The SEC is obviously going to get at least 2 bids. They might get more than 2. And now, people look at the SEC and they say, Nick Saban's gone. All of a sudden, people think Alabama is something you can deal with. Okay? They're still really, really good. They may win it. But you take Nick Saban out of the equation, and it makes everybody else a little bit more confident.
Sure, agreed.
And I think Georgia is a little less intimidating than it was maybe a couple of years ago. They almost made the playoff last year, and they're still very good.
Yes.
But I think they're a little, for the last 2, 3, 4 years, it's been like Alabama, Georgia, and then everybody else. Now I think it's Alabama, Georgia, Texas, Oklahoma, LSU, and a whole bunch of people after that. So I think it's not as top-heavy as it was, but it's every bit as competitive through the top half of the conference. And LSU, you look at the schedule and you say, you have an SEC schedule, you add Oklahoma, and you're playing USC and UCLA non-conference. Are you crazy? But if you look at the way it lays out,
Yeah.
it's more manageable than it might seem. You have Vanderbilt in there. Florida's coming off a losing season. South Carolina is on the come, but I'm not sure how great they are. And so
Got Alabama at home.
you get Alabama at home with a new coaching staff, and the games are spread out. You're not playing 3 heavyweights in a row.
You get Oklahoma at home as well.
You get
right?
Oklahoma at home. You know, Texas A&M's a little bit of a question mark with the coaching change.
Yeah.
You have the bye week, like always, before you play Alabama. So I think it's an extremely difficult schedule, but I think it's as manageable as you could hope for with the way it's laid out.
Yeah.
Now, the key for LSU is, without question, the defense.
Agreed.
Okay. The offensive line, unlike the Saints, the offensive line could be one of the best in the country. Absolute strength.
Yes.
Garrett Nussmeier will not be Jaden Daniels. He does not have to be Jaden Daniels if the defense is better, and I think he's capable of being good enough and maybe being very good. Running backs, wide receivers, they're fine there. Offense won't be number 1 in the country like it was last year, but it can be good enough. Defense was one of the worst in the history of the program last year. It has to be adequate. Doesn't have to be a top 10 defense, but it has to be much improved. They have a lot of new coaches on the defense. I think they were sensible hires. You know, Blake Baker being the DC, Corey Raymond helping with the cornerbacks, and then of course defensive line.
Bo Davis.
Bo Davis. So a lot of reason to be hopeful there. To me, it comes down to primarily the defensive line.
I agree.
When LSU and most SEC teams have won national championships, they have had one of the most talented, strong, athletic, deep defensive lines in the country. You know, when LSU had Glenn Dorsey and those guys, you know, that has been a trademark of the elite SEC programs, including LSU. I don't see that. They have some players who might develop. They don't have proven players. They don't have depth there. So I don't know where the ceiling is for this defense, especially on the line. But if they can be a decent defense overall with what they have on offense, schedule is manageable, relatively speaking. I think they have a chance to be one of those 12 teams, but I would not be betting on that. I might take the over on the Saints at 7.5, but I don't think I would take LSU in the playoff at this point.
Tulane, the John Summerall era has begun. Again, he did really good in the transfer portal, did very well in recruiting. He's been able to hold on to some of Willie Fritz's core as well. They have a tough schedule. Again, when you talk about Kansas State and Oklahoma on their schedule, they seem to be, again, on paper, possibly the class of the AAC. They were picked 3rd by the media this year at media days. Your thoughts on the Wave?
You know, I think they're a lot like the Saints and LSU in that they're in a pretty good position. You know, the Saints had a winning record last year, didn't go to the playoffs, but that's a decent starting point. LSU won 10 games each of the last 2 years. That's a good starting point. Tulane played for the conference championship last year, won the conference championship and the Cotton Bowl the year before that. They're coming from a position of strength. But like the Saints and LSU, they have a lot of transition going on in important areas. A new head coach, new coaching staff, replacing the most productive quarterback in school history, replacing a lot of key players on both sides of the ball. But I think they made a very good hire with the head coach. I think he surrounded himself with a good staff.
Agreed.
I think they've brought in, through the transfer portal and recruiting, the traditional recruiting, they have a lot of good candidates to step into those roles that need to be assumed by somebody.
I mean, when's
different.
the last time you saw 5-star signing with Tulane, even as coming out of the transfer portal?
Yeah, I don't think I ever have.
Me neither.
You know, so just like the Saints and LSU, I think Tulane's in a position, they're starting from a good position. They have a lot of uncertainty in key areas, and yet they have potential replacements in those areas with a lot of potential.
Yeah.
So I think that's the common thread with all three teams, is that, yeah, a lot of uncertainty, but I think reason to be more optimistic than pessimistic would be what I would say.
One of the things that Coach Summerall said yesterday at Media Days was it's a battle with Ty Thompson and Kai Horton for the starting position. That doesn't sound good for Justin Ibieta, the New Orleans native, who's been often injured during his time at Tulane, who's a pretty good, looked like a pretty good quarterback when he's had an opportunity to play. But it'll be interesting again how this thing kind of shakes out at the quarterback position.
Yeah, that is probably, that's certainly going to be the area we focus on the most, and it's probably the most important
especially losing
battle.
Pratt, right? I mean,
because what?
Especially after losing Pratt.
Well, yeah.
And again, how, you know,
most productive quarterback in school history, dual threat, a real leader, a real tough guy, you know, played through injuries. So, yeah, that's really important. Now they do have two, you know, Kai Horton played periodically when necessary, showed a lot of good things.
He did.
Was not Michael Pratt, but showed a lot of good things.
The offense.
And Thompson is a transfer, highly regarded, has been in college for a while, hasn't played a lot. But again, and Justin Ibieta, I wouldn't write him off yet. It looks like he's got some work to do to move up the depth chart.
He's got to stay healthy.
First and foremost, he has to stay healthy. So there are some options there that you can be encouraged about. But I think this is kind of like Garrett Nussmeier, whoever it winds up being. Yeah. He's not going to be what the other guy was, but he doesn't necessarily have to be what the other guy was if all these other pieces come together the way they can. So yeah, quarterback is what we're going to watch, but they have a lot of skilled players. They got a good offensive line.
Makai Hughes is the key for them too. Again, they said they're going to run the ball a lot. He's a heck of a runner. You know, they got Arnold Barnes as well. Shotty Clayton as well. So they got a nice stable of running backs.
Yeah, absolutely. They have depth there, and you know, I think one of the things maybe hasn't been fully appreciated is just what a great job Willie Fritz and his staff did. I mean, it's historic.
Yeah, it really is.
In the history of Tulane football. It was phenomenal. And I think they got the best replacement for him they could get in John Summerall.
I agree with that.
And he can keep running with this, I think. But that is uncertain. When you're replacing probably the most successful coach in program history, that's a question mark. But again, getting back to my original point, I think all of these areas of transition, they are transitioning to replacements who have a lot of potential to keep things going the way they've been going.
I got 40 seconds. Do you think that Tulane could be one of the top 12 teams in the country in terms of getting into the playoffs?
They can. I would say that their chances are less than LSU's. I think LSU's are less than 50-50. I think it's less than LSU, and yet their route there is different. You know, if they're on a weaker conference, they can win their conference without being an elite team.
True.
Whereas LSU could be a borderline elite team and finish 4th or 5th in that conference. So
the question is, can you go with 2 losses?
Yeah, I don't think so.
I don't know if you can.
I mean, if those losses are by 1 point to Kansas State and 1 point to Oklahoma, maybe. But
I can see 1 loss, but I can't see 2 losses.
No, if there were a 12-team playoff 2 years ago, they would have sailed in.
Right. But that's look. That schedule lays out for them. It's going to be difficult, obviously, again. But look, if I'm not mistaken, they beat Kansas State a couple years ago, didn't they?
Absolutely.
In Manhattan. So, again, anything can happen. Les, thanks so much for joining us on the program. As always, we appreciate your time.
Thanks, Eric.
Les East at CrestCitySports.com and also Saturday Down South. All right. So many ways to catch our program now. There's a QR code on your screen that'll take you to the WLAE-TV website. Also, again, I'll also let you know again how many different ways you can catch our program, from Pelican Sports Television to all the rebroadcasts here on the WLAE-TV network. All right, catch me on the radio, 106.1 The Ticket. That is 4 to 6 weekdays. You can listen live at ericasher.com. Also download the Ticket 106.1 app, as well as iHeartRadio app, TuneIn Radio app. And of course, as always, we appreciate you checking out this program as well as the radio show. I want to thank the underwriters who make our show possible. Please support our underwriters. And of course, special thanks to our folks here at WLAE-TV who put on this show each and every week for us. Ron Yeager, Jim Dotson, Alex Chacon, Danielle Wick, and of course the best director on the planet, William Hill. I'm Eric Asher. For Les East, we'll see you next week for another edition of Inside New Orleans Sports.
This series, we get to know some of the most famous designers and their fashion legacies. We'll also get to know new designers and learn how they are forging their way in this competitive fashion world. From the red carpet to fabulous furs, from the little black dress to dazzling beaded gowns, we will have fun exploring how these design concepts can be stitched and included in our everyday lives. Join us on Fit to Stitch.
Saturdays at 10:30 a.m.
Earthquake in Turkey, 50,000 dead. Cyclones in Malawi, more than 500,000 affected. Conflict in Syria, 1 million dead. 735 million going hungry every night. CARE is there. Visit care.org.
Hi, I'm Eric Asher, host of Inside New Orleans Sports. Join me every Thursday, 6 to 7 p.m. for a live broadcast of Inside New Orleans Sports, featuring a reporters roundtable with local media members that cover the Saints, Pelicans, LSU, Tulane, and prep sports. Don't forget your calls are always welcome. That's Inside New Orleans Sports, Thursdays 6 to 7 p.m. with a rebroadcast on Fridays 10 to 11 p.m. on WLAE-TV.